So why don't we go ahead and call the meeting to order. And welcome to everyone. What we want to do tonight is just go through the bylaws on the sections on the budget, the Finance Committee. The background on this is that they had little different versions of this that they had put together with the committee at that time. And we were offered the opportunity to talk to them. And so we spent quite a bit of time and attended 3, 4, or 5 meetings over the course of a couple months, and laid out what we think was a slightly different story from, I think, the one they had been working from, for what was needed and required and who was doing what. And I think there was also some misunderstanding about some things that had happened in the past, which we cleared up by showing a whole series of emails that had gone back and forth to explain exactly what happened. So we had an opportunity to work with them and put together the version that if you've read the bylaws in those sections that you see there. I think the principal change is this. Under the current bylaws, the budget process starts with Chris. He puts together a budget which shows to the select board. The select board then approves or disapproves that budget. But then Chris turns, after he does whatever he wants to at that point, his next step is to turn the budget over to the Finance Committee. And then the Finance Committee does whatever investigations it deems necessary. And the Finance Committee sets the final budget that will be presented to town at the annual town meeting and is printed in the town booklet. That's the way it's been for the last, I don't know how many years, certainly as long as I've been on the Finance Committee and before that. So the change that was made is that under this one, Chris will put the budget together and he'll show it to the select board, and then he'll show it to the Finance Committee. But the budget that is printed will no longer necessarily be just a single budget. First of all, the budget that will have the budget figures that are actually presented to the town for the budget will be from the town administrator's budget. And then in the printed booklet that goes to the town, there will be an opportunity for the Finance Committee or the Select Board or both to print a recommendation if it differs from the town administrator's recommendation for any of the budget items that it so desires. So it does 2 major things. One is it changes who has the authority to write the formal budget that will be presented to the town, but also then changes who has the opportunity to write in the annual town meeting booklet what recommendations they have about the budget if they're different from what the town administrator has. So far, that and the way this is written is that applies only to what we have as the formal budget that is presented, but does not apply to the rest of the monetary items. Finance Committee is required by law to comment on all monetary items, but the things that are in the warrant articles, we will not have an opportunity beforehand to express an opinion or express a different figure or anything else about the warrant articles. It's the way it is now. But we will still be required to speak at town meeting about the warrant articles that have financial implications. Bob, you think of anything else that's a major change?
Well, one thing is the financial plan that we're supposed to come up with that the town will have to agree on, and which sort of, I think, still leaves us in the position of being in charge of the town finances. If you set the rules, everybody pretty much has to live by them. Obviously, from year to year, you can have exceptions and maybe never meet your goals, but in the long run, I think we're still controlling the finances.
The issue that the issue that pervades the entire process that I've always thought was the key thing is that in the current bylaws, basically the finance committee is the only group in town that is charged with being unbiased in their presentations, unbiased in their thought processes. Nobody else is charged with that. And as a matter of fact, it is, I would think, virtually impossible for an elected official to be charged with that. Elected officials, by their nature, are elected on the basis of their biases, to say what they believe should be done. But for the finance committee, that's not true. And we work to make sure that that is still included in the description of the finance committee. But it also then is important for how we go about doing our work. Our work should be done in the same way that we've always done it. That is a sort of a reasoned discussion, debate about the topics that are included under any of the budget items. So that is still there. And I think that taking the lead in developing a financial plan for the town is a good one. We've never had that opportunity. There's been a lot of discussion about it in the past. Chris and I have had a number of discussions in past years. Steve Nally has been part of the discussions in past years, but we've never actually taken the step towards putting together a financial plan. This would seemingly require it, although I don't think there's a specified time for when the first one might be due. But I would think that would be something that we would want to do fairly soon into the new fiscal year.
Okay, I'd like to, can I share? Go ahead, Bob.
Okay. Let me give you sort of my experience. First off, what was initially proposed was that the Board of Selectmen would submit the budget to the town. And I think that both John and I felt that that wasn't appropriate. That's got too much politics involved with it. The Finance Committee, if you go far enough back in time, and I'm probably the last living Finance Committee member, I was chairman of the Finance Committee before Proposition 2.5 came in. So and there was nobody in the selectman's office other than the secretary, period, as an employee. So it was one hell of a job to try to put the budget together and maintain your job on the outside, because you're doing all the work yourself. You make up the forms, you may not distribute them, you get someone else to do that, but you've got to go through and you got to meet with every department, or as many as you want. You've got to have some discussion. Nowadays, well, and then Proposition 2.5, and what would happen was things would just get voted in, and people get taxed. So if all you had to do was have enough votes at town meeting, and you had no control over the finances. Putting together the Finance Committee book was a cut and paste operation. You took last year's book, typed up the new numbers, and scotch taped them over the old numbers and sent the thing off to the printer, and he did typesetting. So then probably, and I went away, got off the Finance Committee for a couple of years, and then the person that replaced me left. So I got called back in. And at that point in time, the first administrative assistant came in. And let me tell you, it was an awful lot easier doing the work when you had someone in town hall who knew what they were doing. John's experience was pretty much, I guess, all with me.
Yes, Bob was the predecessor position to the one Chris had as town administrator, and it's been working as Bob described the new system ever since. Is that the person who worked for the select board did all the initial work and put the budget together. With the town administrator, the further extension has been that it used to be when Bob was there, it used to be that the finance committee still actually interviewed every department and every elected official. I mean, we had meetings that went on for hours and hours and hours, and took a long time spread out over days, as we actually talked with everybody who had anything to do with putting a budget together. And the town administrator has taken over that chore, and the town administrator now does all the initial work of talking to all the other elected officials. The town departments all report now to the town administrator, so he gets intimately involved with those budgets, and he knows what he's doing, just like Bob before him understands the finances of the town, understands where the pressures are, understands where the financial pitfalls might be. So it makes the whole process for the town as a whole just go infinitely smoother, and gives it, I think, a whole lot more credibility. And then, of course, now, as Bob mentioned, since we've come under the constrictions of Proposition 2.5, there really does have to be more than just a reasonable amount of thought. There has to be some real thought that goes into what you're going to put forward for a budget, because you can't just tax anymore to allow people to do whatever they want.
Okay.
Because of all that, I'm a strong believer that you need professional management doing your budget for you. I don't think to rely upon volunteers, you're going to end up with anywhere near the efficiency and accuracy that you'll get with a paid person. But one thing that we did was to make sure that the town administrator's description or job description carried with it enough so that he would be a financial individual, not, we'll say, a grant writer necessarily, or somebody who was an activist, but someone with nuts and bolts financial acumen. And when Chris was hired, one of the failings I saw at that moment, almost saw, was that the Board of Selectmen wasn't terribly concerned about getting someone with a financial knowledge in there. And somehow or other, we managed to switch it around and get someone who, well, Chris was he was a business manager up, and then town accountant. So he had plenty of experience and was able to step right in and do the job proficiently.
Yeah, the other thing that went along with Finance Committee being charged with being unbiased, neutral, and all of its and how it went about its work and made presentations, is that they've kept the bylaws keep the same process for becoming a member of the Finance Committee. To become a member of the Finance Committee, you have to first be nominated by the town moderator, and then that recommendation goes to the select board, and then the select board, by a majority vote, has to approve the person. So that in theory, we come to the job of the Finance Committee through the political process, and that the town moderator is an elected official, the select board are elected officials. But because it's two different ones in the process we go through, I've always myself considered the Finance Committee to be basically responsible to the citizens of Granby. I look upon the Finance Committee as having as the only place where the citizens, the voters and taxpayers in town get to have a real say in what's going on with the expenditures of the money. And I think that is preserved by the processes remaining the same, and by the fact that the Finance Committee will have the opportunity to put forth in the actual written document any budget recommendations that are different from the one that is presented by the town administrator.
Okay, I would like to play a little bit of devil's advocate, because I hate that. the town administrator is also the town accountant, and because he's the town administrator, and he also, appoints the auditor. So I sort of look as, I understand the budget and all of those things, but I sort of look at the finance committee as a checks and balances, as a check in the whole system. Now, I understand from an efficiency professional standpoint that we're going to see even more decision-making power. And although we can look at this as really something that, well, he's already doing most of it anyway, we've actually now given up the actual power to set the budget. Okay, so if we're representing citizens, Chris will now have total power to set the budget. Yes, you go through these administrative approvals, but he's calling all of the shots. So as John knows, one of the things, because I was on I was a counselor in the last years of the existence of the Hampshire Council of Governments, and there was all this political newspaper stuff. One of the areas that we got heavily involved in was transparency. I'm not saying anything's going wrong or anybody's ever done anything wrong, but from a transparency standpoint, you now have ceded more and more in all power to the town administrator. So now I come back to the point of, so why do we have a select board? I mean, it's more rubber stamping. We're more rubber stamping. Do we have a guarantee that if we disagree with what's put forth, that what we write will actually be published? Who controls that? Do we have that absolute control, or is it not the town administrator that controls what's printed? And so they have the authority and the option to decide what is printed and what is not printed. So let me wrap it up. So before we completely cede all of this power and authority so that we can be more streamlined and efficient and everything else, I think for me, the question becomes, so what really is the purpose? What are we, like the loyal opposition now? If we write something that's different, or I guess we're going to write an opinion that agrees too, I suppose. So we're really like an opinion writer around the rationale for what the budget is. So to me, that's just sort of going, I was on the committee a long time ago, and John and I remember bringing everybody in and how many hours and tedious it was, and how much my wife complained that, I wasn't available to spend more time with the kids because she needed. But anyway, that's where I'm coming from. I'm not saying that there aren't a lot of good reasons to do this. I'm just saying that in doing this, what are we now? We may represent the citizens, but what do we need a finance committee for? We're just a rubber stamp, because all the decisions are already made. As long as it balances and, we have enough funds from free cash and from all of these other spots, Chris totally dictates the budget, period, with no option for anyone else to have any meaningful decision-making capacity. So
well, let me speak to a number of those points. I think the most important one is that right now, and I think into the future, we do have the opportunity to have a strong voice. The fact that Chris does the initial work and does all the original information gathering doesn't mean that we can't do whatever it is that we feel is necessary for us to find out about the budget. Right now, before this committee ever meets, I myself, in past years, have spent anywhere from 2 to 5 hours talking with Chris and going into details on most. We get virtually every piece of information that there is. Not necessarily every piece, and we wouldn't want every piece, but we get more information than a lot of people might think reasonable. If you take a look at what's in the spreadsheets that we get, the detail that's in the budget items is enormous. And before we meet, I spend that time going over virtually every item in the budget, concentrating on the ones that look different from trends in past years. And Bob was with me this year for that. We had such a short time to get this stuff done this year. And I thought it'd be better if two of us went in and worked at it. It might get done in a shorter time, and it did, in fact, because we could do things in fewer meetings. But I've never felt that we've had anything other but than complete freedom to be able to put forth what we want to say and how we want to say it and the numbers that we want in the budget. We can check in the way things are written, but for example, the write-up that we do for the annual town meeting budget is still there as a requirement, and we're required to speak to any of the items that have any kind of monetary significance, and there is nothing in the bylaws that says that anybody has the right to edit what it is we say, and nothing we have ever wanted to say has ever been edited. Well, I've been there.
Okay,
So,
but what I'm saying here, no, but we're now ceding power. With this bylaw change, we are ceding power. So to a degree, so all I'm going to ask is there language in this bylaw, in this change, that specifies that, that the finance committee, will submit its comments unedited by anyone else. So that's all I'm saying is I'm saying that if we're going to cede that, I want to make sure that the right to protect, so that the finance committee can truly be independent. If that's what we're supposed to be, we're supposed to speak for the citizens. Because as you know, I mean, we often say very unpopular things. I mean, when it comes to parents and kids and school budgets and that, you got that side and you got this side. So all I'm saying is that I understand why we want to go in this direction, but at the same time, I want to define or carve out at least some, some level of power so that we have that autonomy that we say we have right now. But also, if it was Joe Fernia, I don't think that, Chris and I don't have the same good relationship that you have. So if it was somebody else, maybe you don't get as much stuff being shared. Maybe you don't need it. So I'm just saying that if we're going to give up the power, I want to preserve a certain level of autonomy that gets through to the townspeople if we're going to truly serve that role as representing the citizens and not just the powers that be that make their political decisions or whatever they're going to do in the operation of the town.
Do you have a copy of the bylaws or the proposed bylaw there, Joe?
No, I haven't seen it.
You haven't seen it. Okay, look, I'll try.
Somebody needs to email it to me.
So I sent an email around yesterday to everybody that contains the URL of where you go on the town website to get to the
Okay. Then I'll look for that. Then I'll look for that email and I'll read the bylaws. But I'm just saying, from what you've explained, I understand the rationale. I just want everybody to understand that my position is checks and balances, autonomy, that kind of thing. And so I don't want something to sort of be at the discretion. It should be part of the rights or duties of the finance committee, not just at the discretion of the town administrator or select board. That's just how I feel.
When you get a chance to read the bylaw, when everybody gets a chance to read the bylaws, you can take a look specifically at the things that are said. And I think it's basically covered, at least by.
Okay. Then if it's covered, I'll find it. Yeah.
But if not, I mean, it shouldn't be a problem to throw in the word unedited someplace in there. But I don't know if that's really going to be necessary. Another thing, though, Joe, is that you made your comment about we sometimes say unpopular things. I don't think anybody's going to want to take that away from the finance committee, because there's certainly no elected official who's going to go out and say very many unpopular things, and there's certainly no employee who's going to go out and say unpopular things. So that function has to be done someplace in town, and I think we're the designated body to do that.
Yeah, but we're still filtered because we still have to be appointed by the select board, and they have their political stuff.
Well,
I mean,
it's a
you know.
two-part process. It's a two-part
Yeah.
process. The town moderator and the select board are all involved. So it's not just the select board.
Okay. Okay.
So John, how does the renewal work? You know, after the 3 years, is
Same thing.
select board
Their-
and the moderator
Their
still,
appointments are by 3 years, and
Right.
then we're appointed again. So it's
Okay.
it's technically not a renewal. It's an appointment for a 3-year
through the same process? Gotcha.
same process. Same process.
Joe, when you said we gave up authority, that in my mind, yes, we did. However, the finance committee has never been bashful about making an amendment to a motion. So if what the town administrator wants is is the way the motion is read, any member of the finance committee can stand up and say, we recommend doing something other than that. Which is you're not quite, to defeat an amendment is a little harder than to pass the original amendment. But we still have the wherewithal to do it.
Yeah.
One other thing you mentioned, and I sort of agree with it, was your comment on accountant and auditor and so forth. And I agree, but there is nothing, I don't think, in this bylaw that says the town administrator shall be the accountant. It works out that way now, but it doesn't have to be that way. So well, I agree that it's the fox in charge of the chicken coop.
I mean, right. I mean, I'm not saying Chris has ever done anything wrong, nothing but right for the town. But when you look at transparency and you look at everything else, you know, it's just, you know, there's certain things that you need to do. And
Let me talk about a couple
one
of
of them. I think those, but in either case, I'm just saying when you vest all the power in an individual, and maybe my own political positions over the last president are coming out, but you know, it's just, you know, if we have a certain power, anyway, you know, I want to make sure that we have the independence. But
Yeah,
I'll
let
read
me
the bylaws. I'll read the bylaws tomorrow, and so I'll be ready.
Okay. All right.
To
Let me just say though, in brief, that in terms of whether or not we have less power to prepare the budget, I don't think that's correct, because it's still written in to the bylaws that the finance committee has the authority to request any information from anybody for doing the budget. And we can in fact, if we wanted to, bypass every piece of work that the town administrator does in putting together the budget and start from scratch. We can go and interview every department head, every elected official, have them go over their budget line item by line item with us. So, which is the thing that the town administrator does now. We can duplicate that if we want. So it's not as if we're being told you have to take this word, you have to take the word of this person and go from there. We don't. We only do that because we believe that it's working best. Also,
Hey, John, this is Rich.
Yes.
Sorry I was a little late, but you know, in reading it, you know, looking at budget process portion of the bylaws.
Yeah.
You know, stating clearly that the select board and finance committee shall review the proposed budget, and each shall make its own recommendations about the proposed budget for the town.
Right.
So, you know, it's clear that, you know, they want us to act as independent advisory in terms of the budget, and says all town officials and financial records shall be made available for this purpose.
Yeah, and that was certainly my impression when I spoke and when Bob spoke with the bylaw committee. They don't want us to go away.
No.
They were trying to, I think, to include more people and put a little bit more politics into it, then
It does also go on to say in the next paragraph, the booklet shall also include any budget recommendations from the select board or the finance committee which differ from the town administrator's budget.
Right.
Okay.
So it said, so anything we publish, and of course we're having public meetings here where these decisions or thoughts, and Joe, I agree with you, sometimes unpopular, would be discussed in a public forum already here in a public meeting. So if they were ever not included in the booklet, it would be pretty clear and obvious.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Also, let me speak about something else, because I and past finance committees were involved in this in some detail. Years ago, the town had a separate, not the auditor. The auditor is always separate. Had a separate. What are the things that Chris does? Chris does the town administrator, and he's the on finances.
Accounting?
The accountant, the town accountant now.
Accounting.
Yeah, we had a separate accountant, and that person retired. Question then becomes, how do you get your accounting done? Well, a number of things were tried. First, it was very hard to try to find somebody who would wanted to be a part-time accountant. Very, very hard. As a matter of fact, it turned out to be virtually impossible. So they had to do something else. Among the things that were tried were an outside, the Council of Government had a push on for a while to be town's official accountants, and we tried that out. They were our accountant for at least 1 and maybe 1.5 to 2 years, and it just did not work out. They were not closely involved in what was going on in town. Couldn't be, the amount of time that they were willing to give to us. So the question came up over and over again from the select board. Started from the select board. The question was asked, and we got asked to think about this too. Of what do we do about the accounting position? And what the finance committee debated and finally concluded was that, in theory, you should have a separate accountant from the town administrator. But for our circumstances at that time and now, we had complete confidence that the town administrator was in fact an honest accountant and a good accountant. And so that although there theoretically could be a conflict of interest, we did not feel that one actually existed. Same kind of thing that happens when there are people who get elected to various boards, including the finance committee and even select board, so on, where there could be questions about whether there is a conflict of interest. Well, there's a process for sorting that out, including going to the state and getting their advice and running through certain processes in town to make sure that you've thought about it and examined it as much as possible, and that you've come to a decision, which means that you've done everything you can to basically eliminate the possibility of a real conflict of interest. And I think that's what happened, why Chris has been the accountant for so long. To have the accountant be different from the town administrator, I think I'll probably have to wait until we really have a new town administrator and an examination of what it is that we want to do with the different positions, because it will certainly cost us a lot more than it costs us now to have the accounting done. So I've been comfortable long because of the personalities, but it will cost us a lot more.
And again, notwithstanding the current state or the people in positions, just from just clear governance perspective, they should be separate, right?
Right. Yeah.
So
we all agree. Everybody agrees.
It is what it is. We are where we are, and again, I'm not saying anything negative about Chris, but just from a pure transparency and governance perspective, those things should be separate.
Right.
Right, but we all agree for the time being that they're not going to be separate, at least until Chris retires, whenever that is, and at that point we can address it, and we can address ours, because maybe with the new town administrator, one of the conditions is, oh, they have the ability to write basic grants. So we can get some outside money, for example, or budget somebody else. I know that there's been an attempt to do that, but I sort of, so we always have to look for opportunities. I mean, no money is free. You got to write a grant, but there is a formula out there, for certain things. And so long term, that would be a strategy. But anyway, look, I understand what everybody's saying, and I guess it is what it is. So I'll read the bylaw language, and it sounds like from what Rich read, it sounds like that is going to satisfy my concern about the level of independence and the right to communicate unedited to the town. We're only edited by this board, by what this board, agreed on consensus that we should communicate to the town. So, okay. I'm done, John.
Okay.
So, John and Bob, so you guys, spent a lot of time working through this, and we didn't really like the concept initially, and now it seems like you guys are on board. So there isn't really anything that you're thinking that we need to adjust or adapt or ask them to modify?
Well, that's the purpose of getting us together as the committee and looking at what it says and see if we're comfortable with it. As I said, my concerns have been that I, and I think a lot of others, have viewed the finance committee as, because of the process, as being the time for real input from the voters in town to what's going on, and I think that protects it. But let me tell you something else that I discovered in our process of talking with the finance committee. I mean, with the bylaw committee. I sent an email just before this meeting, not in time for you to actually get together, for you to actually read it, but it's entitled on the fiscal year 2020 budget authority backup. And it was very interesting. What I did was I sat down with the 2020 budget that was approved. And I went through and I asked myself these kinds of questions. In this budget, how much of this budget really, from the point of view of taking a realistic look at the budget, was non-discretionary? That is, no matter who wanted to do what, we really had to do what was in the budget. There was not much of a choice. It might have been a choice as to how much to spend, but not whether a significant amount of money had to be spent on certain things. There are some items which are basically non-discretionary. They have to be approved. The functions have to be done, and you have to finance them. There are also items which are recommended by the select board. They're not recommended. They're not, in theory, coming from the town administrator, and they're certainly not coming from the finance committee. And so I looked at the things and I broke out what I thought were the items that were really recommended by the select board. The third category was the amount that's required for schools. And the amount that's required for schools included all that goes into minimum net school spending. It includes the actual school budget, and it includes the portions of the town offices that are basically on behalf of the schools. Now we do snow plowing and payroll and all sorts of other stuff like that. So there are items which are included in the budgets of various people in town who are not part of the school, but then get charged against the minimum net school spending. So I looked at those things. And then finally, I looked at the rest of the budget, and I broke it up into two pieces. The part that was recommended by the finance committee, where there's a real recommendation by the finance committee, for items that went for the select board and the schools, and items that went for the other 22 elected officials. Now, here's what I found. 52.7% is required for the schools. Doesn't make any difference who wants to do what. 52.7% of the budget is required for the schools. Now, this is all included capital stuff too. 15% roughly is recommended by the select board right now. 13% roughly is non-discretionary. The part that the finance committee gets involved in is 20% of the budget. And that 20% of the budget, 17.5% roughly, is things that are recommended for the school and for the select board. And roughly 2%, 2.5% is money that's recommended for the elected officials. So we know that there's always theoretically this supposed fight over the budget, but there really isn't a fight over the budget. There's not that much of the budget to fight about. So that's another thing that gave me a little bit of comfort when I was taking a look at, is the finance committee really giving up its role as being the voice of the citizens or not? And it turns out that there's so much that has to be done by law for a town that nobody really has much of a say in the budget. So, and you can take a look at that. It's an email that I sent right before the meeting, and look at that yourself and see how I split that out. But it's another one of those things which gave me some comfort that it was okay to say, well, for putting out the annual booklet, it's okay if the town administrator writes in the first budget recommendations, and then the finance committee and the select board then chip in with where they think there are differences. And as you know, we very seldom have differences with the town administrator.
So one question about funding sources. I mean, are we going to have less to say about the funding sources, or we can still suggest that in our opinion?
Well, right now, funding source, you mean, should it be taken, should a dump truck be paid for from cash, paid for by borrowing, paid for by an override? Is that what you mean by funding sources?
Yes.
Almost all of that is done by the warrant articles. And it's something which we did not address in these bylaws. We didn't feel the need to get into that kind of detail here because the changes didn't seem that important to us. But what's called the budget in the bylaws and what's called the budget, formal budget of town floor, is not the whole budget. The entire budget includes all the money that we spend on capital equipment, all the money that's spent through the revolving funds. All that's part of the budget of the town, but isn't technically what's talked about when budget is talked about in the bylaws. So we don't usually get a say in recommending the source, but we are usually asked our opinion about some things. And if we have a difference of opinion from the way it's originally presented to us, we've always felt free, and the conversation always been welcomed to discuss why the funding source was recommended as it was, and if we have different ideas, why we would think of a different way to fund it. And there have been some changes made. Let me tell you, the principal ways I think there have been some changes in the past there have been some differences involving the ambulance fund and the trash collection fund. There have been some times when we've had some discussions about would we be better off in this particular to fund more or less out of those funds than in the initial go around. So again, that's one of those things which is not really covered by a bylaw, and I don't know if it's necessary. We've never been the primary. We've never been the source of recommending the funding sources.
But
Okay.
let me add something or vary maybe a little bit. Under the duties of the finance committee, I mentioned the plan earlier. It said the finance committee shall prepare, administer, and amend from time to time as necessary a financial model for the long-term financial stability of the town. The plan should include target levels for stabilization funds, free cash levels, and generation, and such other indicators or accounts as the committee deems appropriate. The plan shall be approved by a vote of the town meeting and amended in the same manner. So that's also getting at how the money is used. Maybe not on a by each article, but certainly on a long-term basis it is.
Okay, and that's our charge, what you just read?
Yes, that's right out of the proposed bylaw.
Okay. So let's say we disagree with something that's proposed in the budget. We would have to get up at town and try to write a change.
Yeah. First of all, right now, we don't disagree with anything in the budget because it's our budget.
Right, but let's say now we're in the new
Some
system and,
expenditure. Yeah, we just amend it like anybody else.
right. So we'd have to go through that extra hurdle to try to change it.
Yeah, but that's not a change. For everything except for the budget, that's not a change. Because right now, well, actually, even on the budget, we don't have any role in recommending the funding source. We can talk about it at town meeting, and once the funding source is part of a motion, we can offer an amendment to change the funding source. But the initial funding source does not come from us on anything. I don't know if that answers your question, Scott, or not.
Well, I was trying to think, I was thinking back to the school and, our suggestion to use stabilization money. And would we still have that opportunity in the future, presented with that same situation?
Not only we have that opportunity, any voter in town who comes to town meeting has that opportunity.
Right.
Coming from the finance committee, it's supposed to be probably more carefully thought out, but anybody has that, and that doesn't change. You can always amend something on the town floor.
So what about the percentage of votes to? I get a little lost in, majority and
Yeah.
how does that work again? You have to write go ahead.
For most items, a majority vote is all that's required. If a funding source comes from not from free cash, if a funding source comes from stabilization funds, then it takes a 2/3 majority.
Okay.
And if it's borrowing, it's 2/3.
If you have to borrow money, then it's 2/3.
Okay.
Um,
So we would
There's
still have
even 60% and 90% too.
oh, there are a few
But
things
those
like.
are unusual circumstances.
Matter of fact, I think we had one.
We had one not too long ago, yeah.
Too long ago. Yeah.
So it still boils down to us saying, we want something $200 instead of $100. We still need 50% of the voting members at the meeting to agree with us.
Yeah. If, for example,
To amend it, and then we'd have to have another vote. And then we'd need 2/3 if it was from stabilization, let's say.
no, there are two different things. First of all, just to have an amendment passed to so whatever is offered as the original motion, you only need a 50% vote to change the motion.
Right.
And then, independent of that, you need either half or 2/3 vote, depending upon the funding source.
Right.
And
Okay.
yeah, but if your amendment to the offered motion is to change the funding source, that amendment itself still only requires a 50% vote. But then
Okay.
you've changed the actual vote itself to require a 2/3 vote instead of a 50% vote.
If you were changing it to something that required 2/3.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
So again, it's the difference between what you're voting on and what you're voting from.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, John, are we going to be, last year because of COVID, it was a lot harder. I guess if somebody wanted to amend it was hard because we were approving groups of articles all at once, like this, and this, and we did this sort of what I call bulk approval because of COVID. Is that still going to happen again this year, or are we going to be going by article by
I haven't
article again?
spoken to anybody about that yet, Joe, though. The meeting is Saturday, June 5th, and it's outside. I would suspect they'll use the template from last year as the model for how to run this year's meeting.
They're using a consent agenda again for the boilerplate articles at the
Okay.
beginning of the meeting.
Okay.
So they're
Yeah.
doing exactly the same. Okay. So that
Yeah.
was the consent
And that-
agenda. Okay.
And again, I think anybody still has the opportunity to offer an amendment to any one of the articles within it, have it pulled out of a group and acted upon separately, or at least discuss the motion separately. So that hasn't changed. I think they're very careful about making certain that everybody gets a chance to be heard who wants to be heard about any particular thing.
Okay.
They are going to try, Lynn is going to try to keep speeches short this year, like she did last year. So I wouldn't be surprised to see any other steps taken that could shorten the meeting.
John, I looked at that schedule of the time schedule that's in the budget process.
Yeah,
You remember we said it needed some work. It still needs some work. And apparently the committee isn't doing the work.
okay, well then we can take a look at that. My suggestion is that we end this meeting fairly soon. Give everybody a chance to go back and read things thoroughly, including on timetables. And then I would suggest that whoever can make it on Monday, we go ahead and keep our meeting on Monday at 6:30, and we can look at what we think needs to be done with the schedule. And then I may have some other things. I may have some other things and other items on the bylaw changes that I'd like your opinion on. So we can do that. We can do that in meetings on Monday and Tuesday, and then next Thursday we have to actually vote on the budget.
Okay.
I'm going to send out some numbers that I put down, which it's probably going to show where I'm coming from, but I think it puts a little perspective on what's happened to the budget over the last 10 years. And it may be useful when it comes time to deal with the school and their request for funding.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Um,
Okay. With that, my wife is Google homing me, guys. So let's wrap it up, or I'm gonna be going. No, we have Google Home all around the house. So you can just get your voice activated with Google. So if somebody needs you, you need to communicate, like if our grandson's around, Liam, whatever. So every room has Google Home, and we utilize that. So unfortunately, when I have a meeting, my wife just Google Home me, and I don't know if you heard it, but it's pretty loud when it comes.
I imagine, unfortunately, that our grandfathers and great grandfathers would be appalled.
Yes. Well, hey, look, I keep my cell phone down as much as possible. I want my free time, My daughters and my wife always complain, hey, your phone's on. I wanted to, I want my own time, So I'm not totally wired. I'm not addicted.
Okay. Well, does anybody have any other direct questions that I can answer? We spent the time today trying to tell people why Bob and I got comfortable with what we put together on the finance committee.
Okay.
Or not, then I'll take a motion to adjourn, but let's meet again, whoever can meet at 6:30 on Monday.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Motion to
moved. So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.